So first question, really simple, if you'd like to say your full name please.
My name is Keith Pendleton.
Yeah, and thank you very much Keith. And I think we'll move on straight onto the mining side of it then. So you were talking just then about your starting out in the mining career. So how did your mining career start?
I left school in 1969. Barnsley Main was very local to me, but it closed in 1966. So the nearest pit was Barra Colliery at Worsborough Village. So I took myself off to Barra Colliery and then decided I'd like to take a trade within mining. You didn't think at that stage that mining was ever going to stop, so it's a trade for life. So I became an apprentice electrician and did my 4 years apprenticeship, went to college, got my ME honours, and then got a promotion to an assistant electrical engineer in 1979, at which point Barra Colliery was sending people on buses from Barra to Barnsley Main to go down this shaft, because the coal that we were working was closer, so less transport time. If you went down Barra, it was an hour and 3/4. If you went down here, you walked to the coal face within 20 minutes. So the opportunity came to come to this end, which I did. And at the same time, round about the 1980-81, they started the refurbishment with the view that Barra would shut, be demolished, and the new pit here, which is the number 4 shaft, would be refurbished, a complete new surface mine, and then all the staff would transfer.
So your role in the electrician role, what sort of responsibilities or actions would you have to take out in this role, in the electrician role?
From the main point is the installation as the mine works forward, installation of the electrical equipment, the backup installation, so if we are driving forward we'd use electric machines. They would then be replaced by large substations which would feed all the equipment that goes onto the coal faces as we went forward. So the maintenance of it, the installation of it, the repair and testing of it all. As an assistant electrical engineer, then we had the whole pit, the pit top, underground, the workshops, the new equipment coming in to be dismantled, took down the pit and rebuilt. Probably had control over about 70 electricians, including apprentices that worked a 3-shift system. So fairly big and fairly varied. Obviously when I came over here I was new to being the assistant engineer, but there was a lot of involvement in the government documentation. So every day various people at the pit had to sign for the shaft, the electricity, the fan, the methane extraction plant, which was just around the back at the time. These were all on 24-hour signatures. So 365 days a year, one of the mechanical engineers would walk up to the top of that shaft, examine the ropes, so the winder would go up and down the shaft slowly so he could see the ropes, check the wheels, bearings and various other things. Every week we had to go down the shaft on the cage top, making sure that the cables, the air pipes and everything were intact and not being damaged. So these are things I didn't do before I became an engineer, an assistant engineer, because we just went down the pit and repaired and installed the electrical. So it broadened the horizon.
And now, so we were talking about going up the shaft to fix the ropes, for example. could you tell us a bit more about what this place used to look like then? So for example, you mentioned earlier about where we are right now.
Yeah, well, you can see the archway in the brick. That was the entrance to the shaft. This is the upcast shaft, which you can see and tell because it's boxed in. So the steel work with the windows, the upcast shaft was connected to a fan. The fan was around the back and it runs into the shaft about 20 metres down the shaft itself, and that draws air up. Now if it wasn't boxed in, you'd get a short circuit of air, it'd suck it from the outside here. So that archway there was covered in roughly to where we are here, and materials being sent down the pit, and the men used to go into airlocks which was built out here. So you'd go through the first door. When you got the material in, or when you got the people in, that door was shut behind you, the inside door opened, and you'd pass to the shaft side. Basically it was working 24 hours a day. When it wasn't winding men, the materials were going down the shaft at this side, and when the empty tubs came out, they went out of the back and around that way to go back up there to be refilled and come back down. So hive of activity. When I came over, my office was just over there. There was a large office building, 2-storey. There was a gate to the top, which is roughly where that access to the pit stack was. That was like an overspill car park. The buses used to come from Barrow. They came from Barrow right up to 1985. They'd pull into this pit yard and everybody would go down the pit here. 6 o'clock at morning, 12:30 in the afternoon, 1:15 the men coming out, 7:30 the afternoon shift coming out, 10 o'clock the night men going down. So at the same time, the fan runs 24 hours a day, and the methane plant was running 24 hours a day. And you had a winding engine man covered 24 hours a day. There were 3 winding engine men, one for each shift. So if one of them had a day off, the other 2 had to do 12 hours. There was a legal limit from the government that they couldn't work longer than a 13-hour shift. So it was a hive of activity. So the 2 shafts that's there, the one farthest to the left was a pumping shaft, which we called number 1. This is number 2. The one before it was an old cupola shaft, as was the shaft behind us.
That one there?
Yes.
Yeah. And so you mentioned then about the methane. Where would that have been, the methane?
Right. The methane plant was behind us, and there were 6 methane pumps, which are vacuum pumps, that draw it up. It then passed through a water trap, and we had a large chimney which vented it to atmosphere. And there's 1 or 2 occasions it had flame traps in the chimney, but we have seen 1 or 2 occasions when lightning struck it and the flame has been ignited, and then we had to go, mainly the mechanical people, shut down the plant, turn all the valves off so the gas flame goes out, and then restart it all back up, which took about an hour.
Were there any, and of course this, I don't want to bring up any bad memories or anything when I ask this, but were there any accidents that you bore witness to?
Not from gas. Being the assistant engineer, we sometimes had to accompany the sister down, and on a couple of occasions we've been down to fatalities. However, single life. Obviously in the past, the old Barnsley Main, the old oaks, up to 380 people died in one explosion. think the final explosion here at Barnsley Main were in the 50s. I think it killed about 7. So
Dangerous job, wasn't it?
it was. But English mining is the safest in the world. It evolved into the safest in the world because of its history. So
I think that's quite touching actually, because then of course, like you say, when the pit shut, like you say, it was a signifying of the end of almost English mining. What was your, if you had a role, what was the role, and how did you feel when Barnsley Main did eventually shut?
sad. The coal board had spent about 20 million on the refurbishment. Most of the buildings are still standing because they were new, so they've been repurposed. Some are workshops turned into a warehouse. The road transport was over that side as well. So as Barnsley Main became the replacement for Barra, when I started at Barra there were 3,000, just short of 3,000 employees. When I came to Barnsley Main there was still 1,000 employees at Barra. When the men came over in 1985, the pit was ready to take people in 1984, and we all know what happened in 1984. So they actually came in March 1985. 330 men worked at Barnsley Main. So, and mining the same quantity as coal as when I started in 1969 with 3,000 men. The same quantity of coal will be mined by 300 men in 1990.
And so I think the final question is maybe a more poignant, more deep one. What does this place mean to you now? Like, what would you like to see happen here?
I'd like to see it preserved. It's history, but it's a history that we won't get back. If you consider that all these areas, going back to 1866 when the explosion was, you read that these people lived in Hoyle Mill, they lived in Mesborough Dyke, they lived in Monk Bretton, they lived at Cundy Cross, Stairfoot, up Ardsley. They all worked here. The mass closure of pits in the 60s created the first vacuum. In 1966 this pit shut. In 1968 Monk Bretton pit shut. Fortunately Barnsley Main had a release of life because there were still plenty of coal stocks. As well as Barra, there was in the group, there was Barra, Barnsley Main, Monk Bretton Colliery. So all that coal was available, any of the seams that was left. It's a history that's never going to come back. It was hard work and it was very dangerous work. But it's our heritage. My children, they've been down the coal mine museum. That's the nearest thing they will see. I dare say this industry would have facilitated my 2 sons if it would have carried on. It's a history that we're never going to get back, so preservation, a little bit of funding to keep this as it is, get as much information onto the systems so people can look back and say, yeah, my granddad worked at Barnsley Main. Is that what he used to do? I know my granddad was a collier. What did a collier do? Hopefully this history will be preserved.
That's excellent, Keith, thank you. Unless there's any anecdotes or anything else you want to add at the end, I think that was a very touching and very important point to make at the end.
If you need any more information, you know, are you going out at the other side?